Okay, I'm going to get started. There may be a few more people that join us, and we are recording this today. So if you're not comfortable being on camera, you may want to turn your video off. Welcome. My name is Megan Boyce Green. I'm the director at Rhinestone Woods Environmental Education Center, which is located just outside of Buffalo, New York. I have joining me today, Katie and Maddie, who will be helping monitor the chat box. This isn't a huge group, so I would appreciate if you kept yourself muted, but if you do want to ask a question, you can take the option of unmuting, or you can just put a question in the chat box. I do have a couple of times built into the presentation to give you a chance to ask questions as well. But welcome. We appreciate you joining us today to talk about fashion and beauty as part of our Sustainability 2.0 series. There is another series of lunchtime talks that I've offered a few times in the past year, and I'd like to just explain, why we're calling them sustainability lunch talks. What does that really mean? So when I'm talking about sustainability, what I'm really talking about is the world's need to keep our global temperatures from going up more than 1.5 degrees Celsius on average. And that means we have to move away from fossil fuels in a really big hurry. So really in the next 8 years, to avoid the worst effects of climate change, we need to cut down on our release of climate changing gases into the atmosphere, which means we need to get off of all forms of fossil fuels, so coal, oil, and all forms of gas. And so to do that, we really need to be focusing on the areas that have the biggest impact. So instead of worrying about some of the little things, the sort of 1.0 series of talks focused on the biggest areas of climate emissions in our lifestyles. And that's how we move ourselves around, how we heat our homes, where we get our electricity from, and what we eat. And today's session and the 2.0 series are going to focus on some other areas that can have a big climate impact, which is where we put our money, and then also some of the ways that we spend it. And so today is going to be about fashion. And fashion does have a big climate impact. I do want to acknowledge that I'm not going to talk much about some of the issues that surround fashion and beauty. I am going to talk about beauty today too, but fashion is one that has more of a measured impact on the environment. So we're going to talk more about fashion than beauty. But I'm not going to talk directly about the worker right issues or the ethics of things like leather production or cruelty-free cosmetics. We're going to be focusing really on the environmental impact. And you may have heard of an organization called Count Us In, which works to help people take evidence-based steps that will cut their climate emissions. And fashion is actually one of those areas. So we're going to be talking about that and looking at how fossil fuels are involved. So I thought it might be fun to start with just a question. So I have 3 pictures here with little arrows pointing to pieces of clothing that people are wearing. So if you could take a guess, you can do it in the chat box or you can just shout it out. Which of these pieces of clothing are made from a fossil fuel? So you can put your answer in the chat box, or like I said, just unmute and say what you think. We got a couple guesses for number 3 at this point. Okay, 3 and 1 seem to be pretty popular answers. And we did get one answer, which was all. Aren't all 3? You are correct. Basically, whatever number you picked, you got the right answer. The fleece vest on the left-hand side, the funny looking vest in the middle, and then the yoga pants are all made of versions of oil. And so a lot of our clothing is actually made directly from oil. So we are having an impact on the climate just by making our clothing. But there are a lot of other environmental impacts that go into the making of our fashion. And I'm going to switch over now, and I apologize, I'm not great with technology, but I'm going to switch and have us watch a 7-minute video that explains the environmental impacts. Normally, I don't like to do a video that's quite that long on a short presentation like this, but this one is just a really good explanation of what the impacts of the fashion industry are. So I'm going to get this started. Hold on one second. And I've got to make sure, I think I got to stop sharing. I got to make sure you're going to be able to hear it. Okay, and Katie or Maddie, you can let me know if you can't hear.
Before you buy your next piece of clothing, think about where it came from and the story behind it.
I once rather infamously walked into a Kmart and bought 7 pairs of $7 shoes. I bought the store out of my size, and I just did it because I was like, what? They're gonna fall apart. Like, why not? I might as well just buy a bunch of them. And that's what I did. I just would wear them for about 3 weeks. They would get a hole in them, and then I would throw them away. And then I put on another pair, and the cycle would repeat itself. I just had this total aha moment where I was like, this is ridiculous. I am paying so much money for clothes that don't last. And I just decided that I wanted to own something that was slightly better made, that would last longer. My name is Elizabeth Klein. I am a journalist and the author of Overdressed, The Shockingly High Cost of Cheap Fashion, and The Conscious Closet, The Revolutionary Guide to Looking Good While Doing Good. I was a huge bargain shopper, and I realized at some point I had no idea where the stuff was made, what kind of impact it was having on the environment. And just out of my own personal consumption habits, I went on this journey to discover that hidden story of the environmental impact of what we wear. There's a growing awareness about reducing waste in the US, which is great, but a lot of people aren't making that connection yet about clothing. And clothing is actually 6% of landfill waste in the United States. So while we're really doing, I think, a lot of good work to reduce our waste to landfills and other areas, plastic bottles, cardboard, we know to recycle those things, but we don't often make that connection when it comes to clothes. Most Americans, especially most American women, own a lot of clothes, and I think because they're hidden away in our closet, sometimes we don't even register it. I know that was my experience. I just opened my closet one day and I was like, oh my gosh, I own more clothing than anything else in my life. I owned 350 items of clothing and I wore maybe 10% of it. And one of the first things that I discovered in my research is that I was a typical American consumer. Americans are the biggest consumers of clothing in the world. Americans only wear about 14% of what's in their closet. And I think it's really interesting how extreme this is compared to other places in the world. We buy 21 billion garments per year as a country, and it's estimated that 100 billion garments get made around the world every year. That means we're buying 1 in 5 garments manufactured in the world. So really, like, the heart of what makes clothing disposable is the quantities that it's produced in. So, you know, it used to be that chains would make 2,000 pieces of something. Now they make 2 million pieces of something. I think most people now see clothing as something that's almost disposable. It's something you can consume almost mindlessly. You can go into a store and you're shopping for something else and you're like, oh, it's whatever, 3-for-1 t-shirts. So clothing has just become something that we don't have to put a lot of thought into. But I always try to get people to understand that those choices have impacts. So it is something that we do need to be mindful about consuming. Americans are throwing away into the trash 25 billion garments every year. It's either inconvenient to donate, or people spend so little on their clothes that they are just thinking, why not? I paid $5 for it, so I'm just gonna put it in the trash. But what most people don't realize is that, one, most clothing is either reusable or recyclable. And then the other point is that Landfills are a really terrible place to put clothes because if it's a natural fiber, it's going to release methane when it's breaking down, which is a greenhouse gas that is 24 times more potent than CO2. So it is even worse for the environment than carbon dioxide, which most of us know to be concerned about. And if it's a synthetic material, like your polyesters, your nylon, your acrylic, it is made out of plastic. And if you only wear that garment once, that is another type of single-use plastic. You know, we're so mindful about our water bottles, recycling, trying to avoid plastics, but we need to have that same reflection when it comes to what we wear. The environmental cost of the fashion industry is huge. Pretty much the whole clothing industry is dependent on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are used to make synthetic materials, to create pesticides, to power factories, and in the chemicals and dyes and finishes that make our clothing look the way we expect them to. The fashion industry uses 19 million tons of chemicals every year and 342 million barrels of oil. It is responsible for 8% of carbon emissions. So while we're talking about reducing the emissions of driving, for example, or cutting out our single-use plastic consumption, why aren't we talking about this 8% of emissions that are associated just with what we're wearing? So there isn't a perfectly green fiber. Every single material we wear has its own unique environmental problems. Polyester is made out of a fossil fuel, so it's non-renewable resource, but it also sheds microplastics into our oceans. Cotton is one of the biggest users of pesticides in the world, and those pesticides can pollute the ground and water around cotton fields, but they can also impact the health of cotton farmers. And cotton also uses a lot of water. The clothing industry uses 24 trillion gallons of water every year. That's enough to fill 37 million Olympic-sized pools. In 1990, as much as 50% of all the clothing sold in the United States was also made in the United States. And today, it's less than 3%. About a third of the clothes that are purchased in the United States are manufactured in China, and almost all of the rest of them are also made in other Southeast Asian countries. Around the world, it's almost a universal fact that garment workers are making sub-poverty wages, which means they don't make enough money to get by, to make ends meet. I'm a journalist, so for me, I look at the impact of the clothing industry as a researcher and someone who's just interested in the details, but I'm also a consumer. You know, I also have to get dressed every morning. And I think the most profound shift in my life is just deciding to be aware of that environmental impact, aware of that social impact of what I'm buying and what I'm putting on my body every day.
Okay, so I'm going to shift back. Feel free to share what you thought of that video. But I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint. And I should mention too, for those of you who are new to my sustainability series, I will be giving you a resource list at the end, and I did include that particular video on the resource list. So if you wanted to share it with people, you could. So as the video mentioned, you know, our clothes contribute to climate change in a bunch of different ways. There's a whole bunch of synthetic fibers that are made from oil, and producing and disposing of them causes climate emissions. By some estimates, about half of the clothing industry's emissions from China and India are from clothing that they're making for other countries. So it's a big part of global climate emissions. And because of the microfiber issue, these fabrics do contribute to water pollution. And they can take a really long time to biodegrade. And as she mentioned, natural fiber clothing has its own issues. One thing she didn't talk about is the fact that a lot of natural fiber clothing is actually often treated with chemicals. I've done this talk before as an in-person talk, and it's a little more hands-on. I actually give people clothing and have them figure out what it's made from. And you can tell the difference between different kinds of Cotton, you know, the ones that have been treated more with chemicals feel different than ones that haven't. And then trees are used to make a lot of what are called semi-synthetic fibers. So this is rayon, modal, lyocell. There's a few other ones. And so that can have climate impacts as well, because trees, as we know, are good ways to take climate changing gases out of the environment. And of course, as she mentioned too, the industry makes way more than we need. So those are some definite impacts. And I see somebody's asking about bamboo. That's an excellent question. Bamboo is a really complicated topic. There are different ways to process bamboo into textiles, and depending on what technique is used, it can have as big of an impact on the environment as rayon, which is made from trees. There is a form of bamboo called, I think it's called monocell. I put it on the resource list, and it uses the same process that they use to make lyocell. So it has slightly less impacts than regular or the other form of processing of bamboo. In general, if you're talking about linens, bamboo can be a better choice than some synthetics, but it's not as good of a choice as, say, organic cotton, if that helps. If you're looking at bamboo for other kinds of products where bamboo is closer to the original woody kind of form that it came in, it has more environmental impacts than it does in the clothing arena. I hope that helps. Again, it's a complicated topic. But there are some things that we can do when we are looking to clothe ourselves. I mean, obviously, we're not going to all start walking around naked. So there are some things that we can do. I like to start with this graphic, which was made by a woman, Sarah Lazarovic, and she called it the hierarchy of needs. It's modeled on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the idea behind it is that we should be focusing down here towards the bottom. So trying to use what we have, buying less clothing, using secondhand stores, and there's so many options now. There are not just local thrift stores and consignment stores, but there are also online companies that are giving us, you know, more options in terms of secondhand markets. Swap parties are kind of a new thing that's sort of popular, where you get together with a bunch of friends and you swap clothes, and also renting clothing. So if you're going to a wedding, instead of buying a dress that you're only going to wear once, you can rent a dress. There's Rent the Runway is probably the best known example of that, but there are other companies that will rent clothing online. If you do buy new, buying high quality pieces, so things that are designed to last for a long time, natural fiber clothing, preferably organic, will decrease your environmental impact. And it also, organic cotton has a lot of benefits for farmers. They generally make more money off of organic cotton. You may pay more, but you're going to have to buy fewer pieces of clothing because it's going to last a lot longer. In general, recycled cotton, linen, and hemp are good options. Monocell is the kind of bamboo that I mentioned that's a decent option for clothing as well. There are also some shopping guides that are on the resource list that give some ratings related to companies' sustainability. They have different ways of measuring, but it's something that can help you if you're trying to choose between brands. It is another option that you can use when you're buying new. There's a brand new trend, which is to put sustainability labels on clothing. You may have heard about this. The New York Times did a big article about this a few months ago. Prince Charles, as part of his sustainability initiatives, has been really pushing this, and Europe is way far ahead of the US in this area. So there's a couple different companies that now offer basically a QR code. They offer software to manufacturing companies where they can put a QR code on their clothing label, and then you can click on that and open the app, and it shows you where your product came from, what its environmental impacts are, that kind of thing. But there is a company in the US called Nisolo. They make shoes, and they came up with this idea, which I think is kind of interesting, of a sustainability facts label that looks like a nutrition label. And so they rate their products based on people and planet. So things related to worker conditions, and then things related to the environment. So those are some trends to watch for in the future. Or maybe if you have a favorite clothing brand, you could, text them on social media and just say, hey, what are you doing to start, being more transparent about where your clothing comes from? Think about adding a sustainability label, that kind of thing. There are also things that we can do in terms of caring for the clothing that we have. Only washing clothes if they are dirty. This is something that as a mother, I've struggled with my children. If they try it on, it tends to end up on their floor. So when I was a kid, we only owned, 1 or 2 pairs of jeans at a time. And so you would wear them several times before you washed them. But today people tend to, just take their clothes off and throw them right in the wash. I've even heard of people freezing their jeans. Apparently, if you hang them up outside in the winter, it can help get rid of germs and that kind of thing. So not washing clothes unless they really need it. Only doing full loads. If you need your favorite shirt for something going on tomorrow, be sure to throw other laundry in with it instead of just washing that one shirt. Using cold water, that cuts down on the carbon emissions needed to heat the water. And air drying as much as possible, because again, that cuts down on the carbon emissions needed to run the dryer. And air drying will also make your clothing last longer because the clothes don't get worn out quite as quickly. There are also some tools that you can use. There's something called a guppy bag. I actually have one. I thought I brought it in here, but I'm not seeing it. That you can put your clothes in and it catches the microfibers in the wash. There's also something called a Cora ball, which is the same idea. You throw this in with your clothing and it helps remove the microfibers before the water leaves the washing machine. And then there are some fancy washing machine filters that you can get. It's still a kind of a new area. I did include on the resource sheet one resource that reviews a bunch of the washing machine filters that are available at this point. And then the third area is to lower the impact when you're done with your clothing, when you're ready to get rid of it. So passing it on. The sweater I'm wearing today was actually given to me by a relative who didn't want it anymore. So again, holding swap parties with your friends, taking your clothes to a consignment shop. And there are now chains of consignment shops that you can take your clothing to that will resell them. You can also donate to lots of nonprofits that run stores or otherwise recycle the clothing. And the important thing to know, what a lot of people don't realize, is it doesn't have to be an item in perfect condition. There are markets for clothing that have slight irregularities. So, stains, that kind of thing, those are often shipped to other countries, but there are also markets for fibers themselves. So for example, if you were to take apart the door on your car, there's a good chance that there would be insulation in there that was made from recycled fibers. Even socks and underwear can be donated, again, because the fibers in those can be reused, even if they aren't sold directly at a consignment shop, that kind of thing. So does anybody have questions at this point about fashion? Let's see how I'm doing on time. I'm running out of time. No questions at all? Okay, if there's no questions, I am just going to keep rolling. So I'm going to do a quick discussion about beauty. And when I say beauty, I'm talking kind of in the broad sense, makeup, hair care, but also personal care, products. I'm not an expert in this area. I can tell you that the impacts of these industries are not as well measured as the fashion industry. So I'm mostly going to give you tips on how to take plastic, which again comes from fossil fuels, out of your beauty care routine. There may be some additional energy inputs to do that, to use products that aren't single-use plastic, but the life cycle benefit is worth it to make some of these changes. And then at the very end, I have a plea to women in particular for a big thing that we can do that can really help out. So the general rules are to look for products with minimal water. So if you think of a bottle of shampoo, a lot of what's actually in that bottle is just water. And the water is there basically as a carrier to get the cleaning agents onto your body. And so looking for shampoo bars and conditioner bars and avoiding liquid body washes and just using soap are a way that you can cut down on the enormous amount of resources that go into making water clean enough to be put into those products. And then also it cuts down on the carbon that comes from shipping all that weight to you. So basically you're shipping a lot of water to yourself when you buy, say, a bottle of shampoo. So that's why it can be really beneficial to try and cut the water out of our personal care products. The same goes for toothpaste. There's now a bunch of different options for toothpaste that don't involve water. It took me a while, but I found one that I really like. So you can try different options till you find one that works for you. Also looking to buy the biggest size that you can cut down on plastic packaging. Buying refillable products. There are some online companies now that you can buy things that come in a reusable container and then you can ship it back to them and they'll refill it. Kroger, which owns Fred Meyer, which is a West Coast pharmacy company, and then Walgreens both have an agreement to start offering some things in their stores where you'd be able to buy a product and then bring the container back for basically recycling and reuse. So they would take the container back, wash it, and then refill it. As far as I know, they aren't actually operating in New York State yet. The only place I know that they're really trying it is out west, but it's supposed to be happening sometime in the next year. So keep an eye out for that. Someone asked what toothpaste I like. I use Unpaste. I'm not paid by them. I'm not really endorsing them, but that's the one that I like. And then there's a lot of stores now that sort of market themselves as zero waste stores. So these are stores that offer refillable products. You can bring your own container and fill up with shampoo or laundry detergent or whatever. There's a lot of online stores that are looking to get waste out of all of the different products that we use to keep ourselves clean and looking nice. Replacing single-use products is another area where we can have a big impact. So this picture shows a bunch of cotton products, all of which contain plastic. It's not always obvious. I mean, obviously the cotton swabs, you can see the stick is made out of plastic, but cotton balls, unless they say 100% cotton, will often have some polyester mixed in with the cotton, and same with cotton rounds. And as you saw in the video, it takes a lot of resources just to make the cotton itself, let alone adding some plastic in with it, which makes it less biodegradable. So there are a ton of options out there now where you can buy reusable products. So again, often made of cotton, but this is going to last much longer and it's not going to create as much waste. So you can buy not just cotton pads, but also you can buy a rubber and recycled plastic swab to replace regular cotton swabs. Additionally, another thing to think about is wet wipes. Even flushable wipes are not truly flushable. Sewage treatment plants hate them. I can tell you the guys at Rhinestone Woods hate them because our sewage gets backed up a lot because of people flushing what they think are flushable wipes. So there are options out there. There are an awful lot of reusable pads available now, reusable wipes. And I think about, I'm not that old. And when I was a baby, moms were using washcloths to wash babies' butts. We were not using wet wipes. So, it's some of what we need to do is go back to the way we did things for thousands of years. So thinking about what single-use products are in your lifestyle that you can change can be helpful. There are a couple of websites that can help you explore this issue a little bit more. There's something called My Little Plastic Footprint. It is a website, but it's really an app that you can use. And related to that website is something called Beat the Microbead. You may have heard of the microbead controversy a few years ago. In 2015, there was a law passed in New York and a federal law that was passed that banned basically plastic beads in a variety of personal care products. The federal legislation has a big loophole, which is that it only applies to rinsable products. So think body wash, face wash, shampoo, but it doesn't apply to makeup. So things that stay on your skin. The New York law technically covers things like makeup, but I don't believe that part of it's enforced. So there is this Beat the Microbead organization that has a list of companies that have pledged to not put any plastic in their cosmetic products. In general, just looking out for greenwashing can be important too. Words like natural, eco-friendly, and recyclable don't have a whole lot of meaning. They're not really regulated terms. The term organic, when it comes to things like makeup, gets very complicated. The FDA doesn't regulate the term organic, but if, for example, you bought lotion that had rose hips in it and that the rose hips were grown organically, then the company may be able to make a legitimate organic claim. But if you have a lotion that doesn't have any agricultural product in it, they could still put the term organic on their label and it's not technically illegal. So you just have to do a little research and be careful about that before you pay extra for some organic product that isn't really organic. There is something called a certified B corporation, which you might have heard of. These are corporations that have to meet certain standards, both environmental and worker protection standards. So that's another thing that you could use as sort of a search tool. I put it on the resource list to help you find things that are better or not. Oh, and then there's the organic label, which I forgot to take off. I do want to mention too, just to be careful if you choose to use a subscription service, there are companies now on the internet that are offering to, provide these, quote unquote, eco-friendly products to you. But some of those services will send you things that you didn't necessarily ask for. And that is not necessarily a sustainable business model in terms of the environment. It might be great for their bottom line, but you just need to be a little careful if you do sign up for a subscription service to make sure you know exactly what you're signing up for. Does anybody have questions at this point before I gross everybody out? Okay. So I apologize that this is probably going to gross you out, but I just need to talk about this because this is so important for women in particular. So this photo was taken in 2015 at the Buffalo Sewer Authority. The Buffalo Sewer Authority, takes the waste from Buffalo and some of the surrounding suburbs. And after the waste comes in, it goes through this very complicated process to remove solids, clean the water, and make it good enough so that it can be discharged back into the Niagara River. At the end of the process, the water sits in these big giant pools outside, and the employees basically use these fancy pool skimmers to take off anything that's still in the water that shouldn't really be there. So this picture is basically a vat of all the stuff that they've skimmed off the water that's already gone all the way through the treatment process. And you'll see there's lots of these little white sticks and these little pretty colored sticks everywhere. Can anybody guess what those are? Probably should have told everybody to unmute first. Yeah, you're pretty much right. They're tampon applicators. Plastic in our menstrual cycle is a huge problem. Pre-COVID, menstrual products were the number 5 most common item collected in European beach cleanups. These are a big problem, as you can see, even right here in Western New York. So even plastic pads can have as much plastic in a single pad as 5 plastic grocery bags. So we're using a lot of fossil fuels to take care of our menstrual needs. So what we need to do is move towards plastic-free periods. And there are so many options now. There are a whole variety of reusable cotton pads. There are silicone menstrual cups. You can also look for plastic-free tampons. Most major brand tampons, even if they don't have an applicator, still have plastic in them. So you actually have to read the label to make sure it's 100% cotton tampon. But all of these options are far more widely available than they used to be. You can even buy things like reusable pads at stores on Elmwood in Buffalo. You can buy the menstrual cups at grocery stores. So they're not hard to find anymore. You don't necessarily have to buy them on the internet. And you can figure out what's right for you. But it is an issue that we as women really need to think about and to contribute and find a way to get away from our plastic periods. And I did put a resource on the resource sheet. There's a kind of funny video that was made by a group in England that sort of explains what the problem is. So you can check that out if you want to. So that's pretty much it. I tried to keep it as close to a half an hour as I could. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I'll switch over to show you the resource sheet, but I'll be happy to try and answer any questions that people might have. Oh, I answered everybody's questions. I love days like that. It's not working. No questions at all? Okay, I'm going to put the resource sheet in the chat box, if I can find it. Somebody commented they haven't bought any clothes in 2 years thanks to COVID. That is true. We haven't needed as many clothes. So here's the resource sheet. So it starts just with a little explanation of different kinds of fabrics and what they're made out of. The Looks Like You Need Adventure is a fun little video that maybe I'll show at the end for anybody who wants to stick around. Toothpicks, floss, and floss picks. Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know of many floss alternatives. I have seen like the tongue cleaner, like you can get ones that are made out of metal now, but floss is a good question. I'll have to investigate that. There may be some resources on here that could help you figure that one out as well. So the list here starts with, and I'd be open if anybody knows of any good sources of floss and floss picks that are a little more sustainable, please share, either speak up now or put it on here. A water pick, yeah. Yep, that's a good option. And somebody's asking, are there efforts to bring the cost of sustainable clothes down? That's a good question. I think some of it is going to involve, I guess what I'd say is, as far as I can tell right now, and again, I'm not an expert, a lot of what's going on in the fashion industry is just starting with the whole transparency question. One of the resources on here, the Earth Day Live video, there's actually 2 of them. And in one of them, they talk to the leaders of several brands that are working on this issue. And some of them talk about how it's really hard, even for these clothing companies, to get a handle on their supply chain, because the fabrics might be being made in one place and, you know, the factory is in a different place. They have a hard time themselves keeping track of the impact of their clothing. And so they're starting first by trying to figure out how to keep track of everything going on in their supply chain. Because you are right, a lot of the brands that have made a lot of progress on this are the more expensive brands. And I think one of the things that we can think about as consumers is coming back to that idea of not buying so much. And when we do buy something, buying something that's a little more expensive because it's going to last longer. So looking at it that way, because you are right, that is an issue. And that's where actually I think the secondhand fabric market or secondhand clothing market is really a good viable alternative. I have a boy and a girl, and both of my kids are big thrifters. And I think a lot of it just has to do with money. They've realized they can get some nice clothes pretty cheaply just by visiting thrift stores. So that is an issue. The cost is an issue that they're going to have to struggle with in the fashion industry. So this section here, Explore the Issues, is a good place to get into some of those those questions. Fashion Revolution is a European organization that's working again on this transparency issue. They do have a good guide that explains all of the issues, including the workers' issues, worker rate issues, but it also has a good guide to fabric care and explanation of different fabrics within it. So that's why I included it on the resource list. The True Cost of Fashion is the video that we just watched. And there are other videos in that series which are really fascinating, looks at what some people are trying to do to address this issue. I skipped over this one, the Project 333. It started as a book, but there's resources available on the website to help with if you decide you want to do what's called a capsule wardrobe, which is where you basically have a smaller wardrobe than a typical American wardrobe, but the pieces are designed so that you can interchange them and make different outfits and looks and that kind of thing without having to constantly be buying new clothes. So that's what some of these resources here are. Then underneath that are the washing aids that I mentioned, the Coraball, the Guppy Friend, washing machine filters. The gold standard really, if you're concerned about microplastics, is a washing machine filter. But again, it's a very new area. There's not a whole lot of options out there yet. But this article that I included gives a review of some of the ones that are available. And then there's a couple of shopping guides here. I did point out that these are not nonprofit sites. So they are to some extent marketing sites, but Good On You especially has been around for a while. It has a pretty decent reputation. I can actually show you, this is, for example, if you go to their active wear section and look for sustainable brands, they have a rating system, which is explained on their website. And they organize them. Basically, they start with staff picks, but then they go from good to bad. And if you get down to the bottom, they do give some of these not so great ratings. So anyway, so you can check that out if you are interested in certain brands and wanting to find certain brands that have a good reputation. If you are interested in looking for a certified B corporation, I put the link here so that you can look up certified B corporations. Also, for certain textiles, if they're coming from overseas, there is a global standard for what organic means versus what the US says organic means. So you could check this list if you wanted to check on your company's organic claim. And then the last resource I put on this sheet was where to find places to donate. And often those places also have a store, so where you can buy secondhand clothes in Buffalo and then anywhere else in New York. So I'll click over quick and show you this website. You can just click on it and put in your address, and then it will bring up places near you where you can donate clothes for recycling. Then the beauty advice sheet, I listed some of those general guidelines that I mentioned during the presentation. I did put some guides in here. The Environmental Working Group Skin Deep site is a really good site, but it's focused far more on toxics than on the environment. Better Goods is another site that focuses on both toxics, but also the environment. The list of plastic-free cosmetic companies that I mentioned in the presentation is here. My little plastic footprint is here. And then there was one site that I found that had a decent explanation of some makeup brands and their efforts to be sustainable. So I included that as well. And then the last thing on there is the plastic-free periods. So you can take these sites, hopefully start your own journey towards more sustainable beauty and fashion. Any more questions? I do like to mention with this series, everybody's journey will be different. It can be really helpful to set a goal for when you're going to do research related to an issue and put right in your planning calendar, a date that you want to make a change. And then please share with us your experience. If you find a great site or a great resource that you've used or you've tried something and it didn't work out really well, share that with us. You can email us, tag us on social media. We love to hear how people's journeys are going. And next week, we'll be talking about money, investing and divesting for a green future. Again, we try to keep these talks to not more than a half an hour followed by questions. So, so I hope to see everybody next week. Unless there's any last questions, we can sign off for the day. Great. Thanks, everybody.